This week on Q&A, Sherman Gillums Jr., Executive Director of Paralyzed Veterans of America. Mr. Gillums, a retired U.S. Marine Corps officer, talks about his own paralysis and the work that his organization does to help paralyzed vets.
Sherman Gillums Jr., what's your job?
I am the Executive Director for Paralyzed Veterans of America.
What is it?
I serve a lot of people. On paper, they report to me, I'm the boss, but I really see myself as responsible for empowering people who care about the mission of helping veterans who have suffered catastrophic disabilities, whatever it takes, find their way back into life. And it's great work because it reflects my own experience as a paralyzed veteran. But that's what I get up to go to work and do every day, is empower people to help us carry out our mission.
How many paralyzed veterans are there that you serve?
We estimate about 60,000 in this country. Most have spinal cord injuries, but a good number of them have multiple sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, various forms of spinal cord dysfunction, and the common experience is the profound effect that spinal cord dysfunction has on just about every bodily system. So we are bonded by that experience, and it's pretty unique in terms of the impact it has on our lives. And so we're sort of a cohort within the veteran population.
I read that the Paralyzed Veterans of America was established after World War II by the government. Is it a government institution now?
It is not. It's actually it was started by a band of paralyzed veterans as a club, a membership organization, if you will, but it was about self-advocacy because there weren't a lot of, you had the other bigger veteran service organizations that had been around for a while, but they weren't advocating for the unique needs of the veterans in that era. And we're talking about things like equal access in society, research. You would die in 18 months if you had a spinal cord injury back then. In fact, George Patton, he survived a couple of wars and was a war hero, but he died of a spinal cord injury in 1946 because the medicine and research hadn't caught up to the desire to live with that injury. And over time, that band of paralyzed veterans grew into what's now a 76-year-old organization of member-led advocates who look for other paralyzed veterans and pull them in and take care of them.
Where's the money come from?
100% from individual donors and corporations. We don't take government funding, and that's the struggle. We have to deliver results. We have to have impact, and we're proud of that because we do have an impact. And because we're free from government funding, we're not bound by those relationships or having to deal in that way. We can be the honest opposition, the loyal opposition, and truly advocate for our members because we have that independence.
What year did you think about joining the Marine Corps?
Oh, the year I thought about it.
And why?
Let's see. I was probably a sophomore in high school. Whoever did the marketing and the advertising, they were looking for me. I think back then there was the dragon with the Marine and dress blues and the sword.
Where were you?
I was in Buffalo, New York. I was a kid growing up in a blue-collar town, and I was smart enough to go to school, but I didn't think that was for me. I wanted adventure. I wanted to get out of Buffalo and see the world, and love the uniforms, of course, but I wanted to be a military police officer. I'm not sure why I had that fixation early on, but I wanted to do that, and I thought the Marine Corps was a good path because of the reputation and the discipline. And so I joined actually on my 17th birthday. My mother had to sign the papers for me to even talk to the recruiter. So I was pretty certain at a young age that this is what I wanted to do.
What year was that? And
I joined in 1990. I went to boot camp right after high school in 1990.
What was the early experience of the Marine Corps like for you?
I grew up in a single parent household, so my mother was the father figure and the mother figure, but the Marine Corps truly became that father figure. I gravitated to that instantly. I loved the discipline. In fact, I loved how hard it was because it felt like something I really needed to earn, and I took a lot of pride in the difficulty I endured to get that uniform, to get that title. But it filled a hole for me in my life, and I think to this day, I owe a lot of who I am to that early experience of embracing the Corps as sort of a father figure, through embodied in the drill instructors and the mentors I had in those early years, and a lot of my judgment today, a lot of the way I view life, it began in those days through those people.
You mentioned drill instructors. They have somewhat of a reputation for people outside the Marine Corps, tough guys. You ended up being one.
That's right.
How did that happen, and what year in your Marine Corps time were you a drill instructor?
Let's see, I graduated from boot camp in 1990, and I went back to the same Parris Island Marine Corps Recruit Depot in 1997. So 7 years later, I would go back, and it was a choice I made. Around that time, I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps, and that's about the time you have to decide whether you'll do the recruiter option or become a drill instructor or a Marine security guard, and that's just to give you a little diversity in your career. And I said, well, I want to go back and be that person I admired, and that's exactly how I patterned myself. I had a great set of drill instructors as a recruit, and I just wanted to emulate them, and because I knew the impact it had on me and how it changed my life, that was my opportunity to do that very same thing for a lot of young men who probably shared my experience, and I fancied myself as being that mentor and that example that would shape their worldview and the choices they would make later in life. And it's an eclectic mix. You get you think of the Marine Corps as these type A jocks, but you get the the nerds, the gangbangers, the jocks, the loners, you get a little bit of everybody, and they're all looking for something, but they want that identity, and that's why the Marine Corps works, because it gives you that identity that everybody can get behind as that Marine. And
so what was your approach as a drill sergeant that you decided to take because of the drill sergeants you might have had in the past? Did you have any rules for yourself?
One thing I took from my senior drill instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Kirkendall, was that you have to be an example first. You don't ask anybody to do something that you're not willing to do, and to do it with the same level of excellence. So you can't have a bad day. You have to be ready. So I went into every contact with my platoons ready to be that model of perfection, as close as I could become. And of course, we're all fallible, but when you're on a run, you don't show signs of weakness. When you're and you be consistent. That's a big one of the secrets of being a disciplinarian is that you're consistent. You don't go too far in any one direction. You're always at sets. Expectation doesn't waver, and I think that recruits appreciate consistency in the demand for discipline. And I tried to emulate that as much as I could. And even today, it's got me pretty far.
What do you see happens to an individual who comes out of the civilian world, goes into the Marine Corps, and is in a very tough situation about the discipline? What are the kind of things that happen to people? You
get tested along all your vulnerabilities. Everybody's got something that they're not going to be good at. I don't know of a single recruit that I either went through with or trained that was perfect at everything, whether it was marksmanship, swimming, running, being able to take stress. A lot of the recruits would wrestle with things that they brought to boot camp. You could tell who the guys were that didn't have a whole lot of good parenting, but wanted it. They wanted something better. They just didn't know how to achieve it. And so you actually develop these sort of one-on-one engagements with these young men. Even though there's a lot of them, you try to figure out what is your thing that you're here to overcome. And of course for me it was not having a dad and wanting to have that completeness. But I think everybody finds that one thing that they have to overcome, whether it's being overweight, whether it's being not the fastest, but you all get the same uniform at the end. It's a true meritocracy, but you all, at the end of it, you've all achieved that goal, and you get that uniform, and you have your drill instructor shake your hand. And that means everything, because it means you overcame some demon or something very personal to you to get there.
What's the toughest moment in boot camp?
The toughest moment in boot camp for me, or for anybody, or specifically for me,
just kind of from what you observed.
I think the realization that you made a choice that you probably regret in that first week. I think you realize you stepped into something very serious. I mean, these are usually 18 to 20-year-olds who hadn't taken anything seriously in their life, not to that level. And once you get there and you understand that you're not a prisoner, because you can leave at some point, you can quit, but there's something inside of you that compels you to tough it out, but it comes at a cost. You lose your sense of yourself. I mean, this chaos, and I'm isolated. I feel alone. I don't know these people, and then at the same time, you understand that you're going through a metamorphosis. You're there to be changed and transformed, and this is what it takes. It takes understanding that this is what Marines do. This is how they're created, and you're being pounded like a diamond from a piece of coal. So, but that's a tough process to get through in the beginning. But if you can endure that, you're going to make it, and it's just a matter of getting through it.
What percentage of recruits don't make it?
In my experience, and I think it fluctuates depending on the needs of the Corps, back when I was a drill instructor, we actually undertook a concerted effort to keep more recruits, not drop as many. I kept maybe, I would say probably 10% at the platoon level. I'm not sure at the series or company level, but at the platoon level, you usually, if you have a 60-man platoon, you'll lose about 10 of them, or 6 to 10, something like that. And but in some cases, like I had one kid who was really overweight but really determined, and I made the choice to keep him. And by the time he graduated 3 months later, I didn't recognize him, and neither did his mom. That's the real ROI. You want to see somebody really appreciate the change and the transformation. And so while some drill instructors were quick to get rid of the perceived weak ones, I tried to hold on to the ones that I thought had heart.
Came in 1990. When did you leave the Marine Corps?
I left the Marine Corps in 2002.
What happened in 2001? Where was your accident?
The accident was in 2002, and it was at Camp Pendleton, February 20th. The day began pretty neat. I was training for the LA Marathon, and we were on the base with an Olympic medalist.
This is California.
This is in California. The day I got in the crash that paralyzed me, we were training with the Pendleton running team, and I was finalizing my affairs because we were getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan. So I had a lot going on, and it was sort of an inflection point in my life. And I left the base.
That's in Southern California.
This is Southern San Diego, in the Oceanside area,
near where Richard Nixon used to live.
Yeah, big base there, big huge base on the West Coast. And I got in my car and I left the base just like I do all the time. And I call it a freak accident because there was no rhyme or reason for how it happened. A truck, a semi, got cut off by a guy who swerved in front of the truck. I guess he was going to miss his exit or something like that. And I only know this because I read the reports. I don't recall any of it. He cut the truck off. The truck swerved, and I swerved to miss the truck and lost control of my car, and it flipped 3 times, landed on its roof, and that was the story according to the report that I read. I was medevaced. Surgically repaired my C4 to 6 vertebrae and fused with a titanium cage that held my neck together, and I woke up, I believe it was about 3 days later, at Scripps Memorial Hospital, and that was the new chapter for my life.
Were you married then?
I was not, no.
And what was your first thought when you woke up?
My very first thought was, I can't breathe. Why can't I take a breath? I wasn't sure what had happened to me, but I was on a machine, and I didn't know I was hooked to it until I tried to take a breath, and I heard it slow my breathing down. And I tried to take another breath, and it stopped me. I saw the connection, or felt the connection through the breathing, and I thought, I'm going to suffocate. I don't know where I am right now or what happened, but I'm going to suffocate because this thing is stopping me from taking a deep breath. That was the very first thought when I woke up. And then the next thought was, how the heck did I get here?
Was there anybody that you knew near you at that time when you woke up?
I think it might have been in the middle of the night, and there was a nurse that had passed by, and I tried to yell, and I couldn't because I was intubated or on this machine. And I remember he stopped and looked at me and then walked away, and I thought, I'm going to die. This guy doesn't realize I'm getting ready to suffocate because of this thing I'm hooked to. And I must have passed out after that because I don't remember too much until I was awakened again by the surgeon, who then explained, and of course I'm under morphine and all kinds of medications, who explained that it had been in an accident, and I accepted it. I'm a pretty stoic individual, and that may be some of the way I was raised in the Marine Corps. But I wanted to know details. Okay, so what happened? Did anybody else get hurt? Where am I? Just what happened? And I didn't get a whole lot of that until later on. So, but my brain was alive and firing off. My body just wasn't connected. I was in two different sort of senses of myself.
Did you ever meet any of the people that were involved in the accident?
I did not. I did talk to the police officer who arrived on scene, the first responder. He kind of gave me a brief explanation of what he saw, and then took down my story. He had to get details from my point of view, so I gave him what I could remember. But I never did, and I would love to do that, but I don't know their names. I don't know. I wouldn't even know where to look. I'm not sure if it's in my medical records or not.
Who was held as being at fault?
The driver of the car that cut off the truck was at fault. In fact, I found out later he did leave the scene, but he turned himself in a day later after he had gotten an attorney. He was an out-of-work actor, small-time actor, nobody famous, but that was about it. And I think I wanted to detach from the situation by not knowing too much, because then I'd hold it against this person instead of accepting it and moving on. So I didn't invest time into.
How long were you in that hospital?
The first hospital, 11 days, which is about on average to stabilize, but I got transferred to the VA Medical Center in San Diego for 5 months inpatient rehabilitation.
Well, when did Mom find out about this?
I assumed either the same day or shortly after. A lot of my family was called. I would find out later. And my family flew in that week to see me. I had family in California already, so they gave her a lot of details, and it was pretty tough because I'm her oldest son. You know, I probably had just seen her a month before that, and I had just seen my sister 2 days before that. So I was, you know, upright walking around not too long, and then here I am in this position where there's a lot of uncertainty about how this thing is going to turn out, and it did break their heart. It really did probably hurt them more than it hurt me because they couldn't control anything, or they didn't have information. But yeah, it left a scar, I think, that still runs pretty deep today.
A couple of weeks ago, you made a presentation in front of a group telling them the story about pain and all that. What was the group?
The event was the Paralyzed Veterans of America Health Summit that we put on every year. I think this may have been our 7th year. The group was about 900 spinal cord injury professionals, those who work with spinal cord diseases and dysfunction, therapists, doctors, nurses, social workers, anybody that would touch that population. We have this convening once a year. It's the largest in the country, but it's also mostly employees of the Department of Veterans Affairs. So it's a convening of that specific group of professionals.
Show a 30-second clip of you describing the accident. May be somewhat redundant, but let's watch that, and then you have a technique that you use in order to get their attention that we'll also show.
Close your eyes for a moment. and stretch. Close your eyes. I see you. Trust me, empathy. And I want you to stretch your imagination. Open your eyes. That's how fast it happens. In a blink, no warning.
The reaction of the audience was dramatic right there. Did you expect that?
I don't know what I expected. I think I just wanted something different, something to register that these people you're caring for, they weren't born this way. They didn't just happen to fall into your care. Something bad happened, and maybe the sound effect, maybe that would make them feel it. I don't know what I intended, but I just wanted something different to register to set the tone for what we were going to talk about.
You're talking about empathy and compassion. Discuss that a bit.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that most of those providers are compassionate in the way they do their work. And the point I made was compassion is about healing. You're healing these people. You're trying to relieve pain. Empathy is something very different. And it's difficult to empathize with people that you don't immediately identify with. And when you're a doctor or a nurse, I found in my experience, they don't immediately empathize or really understand what it feels like. You're relieving pain, but do you understand? Some of the things that you say makes a difference. And I talked about how my doctor told me for the first time I'd never walk again. Very callous, very, it lacked humanness. And I said to myself, would that doctor want to hear that news that callously? Would you want that information delivered that bluntly? And I realized maybe that's the way the profession works and you stay detached, but it's not helpful. It didn't help me see him as a healer. It made me mad that it's the same way people find out they've got a cancer diagnosis and it's just, you've got cancer. You're a healer on more than one level. And when you're telling somebody news that bad, how about you have some, you talk to a human being, not an object. So, and that plays out in when you're in care for a long time in rehab. You see too many instances of that, and because I work with them now as an advocate, I point it out to them and I try to remind them, you're dealing with a World War II veteran. You're mad because he's hitting that call switch too many times, and you're a nurse, but this guy probably has sacrificed more than you ever will for this country. Have some empathy. What if this were your grandfather or your dad? That was a tone I wanted to set. It wasn't to give them a tongue lashing, and I wanted to let them know I appreciated the path they chose. But empathy is why the VA found itself, or a lack of empathy, I should say, is why the VA found itself in this position where it's now being challenged in terms of its purpose and whether we need to have this system of care as we know it today.
Here is you describing being paralyzed.
At this point, stop moving. This side of the room, you're quadriplegics. Stop moving, please. On this side of the room, you're paraplegics. You're lucky ones. You can't move. Bear with me. If your nose itches, you can't move. You can't. You're paralyzed. You have to accept it. Over here, you can wave your arms, you can scratch, but don't stretch your legs because you can't.
When you woke up in the hospital, how much could you move?
Nothing. When I woke up, I could move my head. I was in a Philadelphia collar, but I couldn't move any limb, I couldn't feel my body. It's a very surreal state of being. And the only thing I could compare it to that will make sense to somebody who doesn't know what it feels like is if you stood at the edge of a cliff with your toes hanging off and you leaned your head over, where one push and you'd go over. That's what it feels like to lack the connection to your body. It feels like I'm gonna fall any moment, and somebody's holding me up, but I feel like any moment a gust of wind is gonna push me over. And that doesn't even adequately describe it, but there's no real feeling I could analogize it to in the able-bodied world. But it feels like that you're going to fall over at any moment.
How much pain did you feel?
None at first. Can't feel anything. So there's no pain there. The pain,
are you saying at first in the car or in the hospital?
I would say the first 10 days I couldn't feel anything because I was on so much morphine at the time. The pain is really just the uncertainty, the anxiety, the fear. And the real pain doesn't kick in until you begin to heal and the condition resolves itself and the nerve pain begins to creep in and you start to realize, okay, I can still feel my body, but now it hurts. I don't know if you've ever had frostbite, but it's a pretty bad condition. But imagine your whole body feels like that, the pins and needles, and it's constant, it doesn't stop. So I would say, and then of course if you've got joint problems with shoulder rotation and all those things, that adds to it with all the exercises and pushing the chair and those kind of things.
What did happen to you, physically?
The spinal cord injury itself was incomplete, and that's hard to explain for people who don't understand what that means. But you have a complete injury where the spinal cord is completely severed, and you have an incomplete where it's been damaged but not severed. And what happens that causes a paralysis is the cell death. The cells die. They don't get oxygen. They die, and that's what makes it permanent, but only partially. So even though the injury happened here, you've had Christopher Reeve lose just about everything. He had a complete spinal cord injury. Well, with incomplete, everybody turns out differently because the cells die differently and certain parts get spared. And so in my case, I was considered an incomplete spinal cord injury at a certain function level. I can move my arms, I can move certain muscles. Below the waist functionally, I can't move them, but I can feel them. So you've got the sensory, but not the motory. So it's this sort of patchwork of things that work and don't work, things you can feel and don't feel, and it differs depending on the individual.
How many operations did you have?
Actually, I had one, just to surgically repair my spinal cord, and that's all I required. I was very fortunate.
What's the worst thing somebody can say to somebody that has had a spinal injury, or frankly, I suspect any injury? And if you spend all that time in a hospital, I'm sure you've heard it.
The worst thing I hear is maybe one day you'll walk again. Maybe you'll get in the gym, or God will perform a miracle, or and it's not the intention behind the words to make it bad. It's the fact that I'm fine with how things turned out. I'm actually having a pretty good life. I've gotten married. I've got a child post-injury. I'm doing fine. I've got a full-time job. And there's this perception that there's something more, or there's something wrong with me from people who don't understand that sometimes it's, you accept your condition and you move on. It's not the walking that bothers me. Maybe it's not having full manual dexterity. Maybe it's other functions. But that always bothers me just a little bit, although I understand why somebody would say it. But I think that's probably the one thing that I rather not hear.
Back to this event you had for the 900 people that work in this kind of world, helping people out. This is about 50 seconds, and this again goes back to the actual moment when the accident happened.
While you're sitting there newly paralyzed, right now, as you are, the next song you'll hear after that accident you just suffered, it's not a chainsaw or a lawnmower. It's the jaws of life. Your car is cut open like a can. Things you remember are the smell of twisted, burnt metal. And it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life every time you have that smell. Your body is extricated from the vehicle. And the last song you'll hear before going completely unconscious is this. And then it fades to black.
And did you have that same experience?
I imagine I did, because I was conscious. According to the records, I was able to give my phone number, where I worked. I am aware that the jaws of life were used, so I don't know if I pieced it together mentally. And the body goes into sort of this protection mode where the brain kind of shuts down, or does certain things to protect itself from shock, and I probably was in shock. So I think as I understood what happened, I pieced it together, and I imagine that that's the experience. But I can't say that I immediately recalled it after the accident.
The spinal injuries that you deal with all the time in your job, and especially people that have been into combat, what do they look like? What's the difference between what they got and what you've got?
When I became an advocate for Paralyzed Veterans of America, I got to see those folks returning from Afghanistan and Iraq. And the difference is, well, my first case was a young Marine who shot himself in the stomach because in his mind he thought his comrades were trying to kill him. He actually had some pre-existing mental issues, and why he went back there I don't know, but that was the very first case. The next case was a kid who had been blown up by an IED and was paralyzed.
Quadriplegic or paraplegic?
He was a paraplegic, but shrapnel, but not bullet injuries, but a traumatic brain injury from the blast on top of the spinal cord injury. It becomes such a profound state of being that I can't compare it to what I went through. These guys carry so much more because they've got the survivor's guilt. A lot of times they had friends who died in the disabling incident, and they carry that with them. And a lot of them, if they've got a traumatic brain injury, that's a challenge unto itself, even if you don't have the paralysis. So I definitely saw a big difference in the way life has changed when you're in a car accident versus when you're in a situation where someone tried to kill you, and you have to bring that back and then rehabilitate, and your family and all those things. So I got to appreciate through those experiences with those individuals that it's pretty profound, the differences between the two ways to become injured.
Did you get any sense of what impact you had on those 900 people when you made this presentation, and had you done this before?
I'd given presentations before. In fact, I gave one similar that just basically talked about the patient experience, but this one was heartfelt, and it was about me, and the sounds and the feelings and the descriptions. It was much different, but the feedback I got was we needed this. We needed this because I know what the VA is going through. I deal with VA Secretary Shulkin and the President and all these people that talk about what the Department of Veterans Affairs is and should be and whether it will exist. So I speak from a lot of dimensions about this problem. But in that room, I'm trying to tell them, this is the problem. This is what I see from a patient's perspective, from a policy perspective, from an advocate's perspective. You have to empathize. That's what will make it VA the ideal provider for veterans who have gone to combat and sacrificed. But to a man and to a woman, I think they genuinely appreciated this sort of wake-up call, this jolt that we gave them at the event.
One more clip from your presentation. This has to do with what it was like when you woke up in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And the first sound you'll hear when you wake up is this is what it sounds like to be maintained by a machine. When you wake up to that sound, that's what woke you up, in fact. And these are the next set of sounds that will haunt you for the next few nights as you try to figure out what the heck happened while staring in the dark.
Down that peanut blazer for talking to taking this call.
You've been in both private hospitals and the VA hospital. Do people that are working there know what it sounds like to be in one of those beds and hearing all the noise in the background? And can anything be done about it if you don't like it?
I don't think they know, because they're, when you say they, the staff, they're the ones who are making the noises. When you hear laughter, when you're in the lowest state of misery that a person could be in, and you hear folks laughing in hallways and carrying on, then you hear the bed next door, the guy's miserable, he's in pain. It's this cacophony of confusion, and is it happy, is it misery, what am I listening to? And because you're paralyzed, you already feel like you've given up control, but now you can't even stop the noise. That's what I meant by the haunting nature of it. It's usually in darkness that it's more pronounced, and it gets louder, and it doesn't stop until you fall asleep, if you can, or until you're drugged up enough to pass out. I'm sure that everybody means well. Nobody means to make it that. It's just the way the hospitals are. That's why I prefer not to be in them, to be frank about it. But yeah, I think that it defined the experience for me. The noises. That's what I took away from that experience.
Back on April the 19th, 2017, you found yourself in the White House, right next to the President of the United States. We'll watch this and ask you about this experience.
This is called the Choice Program Improvement Act. Speaks for itself. This bill will extend and improve the Veterans Choice Program so that more veterans can see the doctor of their choice. We've made a lot of strides for the veterans. These are like the most incredible people we have in our country, as far as I'm concerned, and they have not been taken care of properly.
Is that last statement right, in your opinion?
I'll always qualify it by saying, yes, in some cases, in too many cases, that's exactly correct. But in many cases, it just depends on the situation. There are some hospitals that are part of the VA system that are great. But in the cases you hear about, there were egregious instances where veterans hadn't been taken care of properly, and we have to fix that.
What was it like being with the President?
Well, we were there to get business done, so we don't get enamored by the moment. It's, you're the leader of this country. What are you going to do to fix this? And, he's a public servant before he's anything. So I looked at it as if it was my opportunity and obligation to speak for the men and women who are paralyzed, who never have this audience. And so I felt more the weight of that responsibility than anything. And then afterwards you kind of exhale and oh wow, this is the White House and the President. But in the moment, it was important that I speak for the individuals that I represent.
And what did that act do, or will it do?
Well, this particular act was to continue the Veterans Choice Program. It's pretty controversial right now because there's no real reliable formula for how to fix what's going on in VA in some instances. But this improved it in some ways by taking out some of the red tape. I think there were some accountability measures. There have been a few iterations since then, and they've all built on each other. But this was the first step towards improving, at that time, what was known as the Choice Act.
What would you tell the President if you had the opportunity of everything you would want done for the paralyzed veteran?
Well, I did get to tell him in a meeting before that event. What I did tell him was that you have a lot of changes occurring, and everybody's got their different ideas about what's best for veterans, period. But don't forget, there are veterans who have suffered catastrophic disabilities. They're the most vulnerable, and they're relatively small. But if you do right by that population, you're going to be able to fix just about everything else. So the problem starts with those who need the most from this department. And if you can get it right, I promise you, it'll bring greater things later. And I think whether he took it to heart or not, I don't know, but we've had some pretty good gains since that time in terms of investment in what's now regarded as foundational services. And these are spinal cord injury and blinded rehab. The Secretary has directed 5% of hospital budgets needs to be reinvested into foundational services. He also authorized the hiring of 800 to 1,000 more nurses in those specialized care systems. This is while we're talking about expanding care to the community, right? So we've got most veterans can get pretty good care outside of VA, depending on the kind of care it is. But there are things VA does well, and it's unique to VA, and you can't outsource it. So you got to invest in it. And so we've seen a lot of that happen, or at least the beginnings of it. And so I think we're going in a good direction.
When you have 150 some VA hospitals, 300,000 VA employees, $180 billion in a budget, how do you keep compassion and empathy in that large an organization?
That's the $64,000 question. I think that's our purpose. We have to be intelligent advocates. You know, emotion is one thing, but we know the policies as good as they're supposed to know it. We have a presence in those spinal cord injury centers, so we're there. And as long as we don't lose our way and forget our purpose, which is to speak for them, it's not about just fundraising. It's not about having access to the president or the VA secretary. It's about the individuals who give us our purpose. And as long as we're putting on health summits, we are doing our site visits, which is what we do every year at all 24 spinal cord injury centers. We provide the reports to the secretary. They're unfiltered. We speak directly to the patients, but that's how you do it. You make them listen to the people that give them their purpose.
If you go into one of those 24 spinal care centers, what do you see?
We see everything. We know we've helped idealize the model center, and so every site visit is a comparison of that center to what we consider the model. And so we'll start with a discussion with hospital leadership about why we're there, what happened last year, and what changes were put in place. Then we visit the unit itself. We look at we have architects that look at the layout, look at barriers to access. We have nurses who are experts in the actual practice and what should be happening clinically. And we talk to all the different disciplines that are a part of the spinal cord injury team. And we talk to the patients. I tell every hospital director, there are 3 questions I ask that tell me how good of a hospital. How's the food? If it's cold when it's getting to patients, you're probably understaffed. You've got some things going. How's the cleanliness? You know, that helps us understand the morale. And the final question probably deals with the nursing staff and how responsive the nursing staff is to your needs. When you hit that call switch, does it ever go unanswered, or is it how is it on the weekends? You know, how is it at night during night shift? Those 3 sort of, you know, symptomatic indications of the efficiency of the hospital tell me a lot, and I start there. And then from there you can identify things like understaffing, or whether there's a leadership issue, or whether there are equipment issues, whether there are injury issues, or just morale overall.
So what would be the difference if you'd had your accident this year versus when you had it in 2002 in the way you would be treated in a VA hospital, or any hospital for that matter?
The difference today, certainly there have been gains in medicine. I think the first responders have a different protocol. I got the steroid shot. I think that was found eventually not to be as effective. There are cold therapies that are used today. There are different ways that you treat on the scene, but there are also different rehabilitation options. You've got different machines now that stand you up. You've got different types of medications that make life a little easier. You got a broader range of options. I guess that'd be a question I'd have to explore by taking a look at how different things are now than they were before. I see it now through the eyes of an advocate, so I've kind of forgotten my own patient experience to that question, and I think more about how we can maximize progress for today's veterans. Even if I didn't have it years ago, I want to see that progress continue.
What's happening in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan to the spinal cord injury situation? Are they going up or going down, or do you have that measured?
Surprisingly, a lot of folks assume that there were a great number of spinal cord injuries in the recent conflicts, there haven't been, because the body's protected a lot better. In fact, I know of at least 2 or 3 cases where the service member was shot through the spine, one right in the neck, and he walks today because of the battlefield medicine and how efficient, they get you treated, they get you stabilized, and they get you out of there. Then you're back in the States within 48 hours. Before, either if you did survive these afflictions, you'd be stuck somewhere, log jammed somewhere, maybe in Germany, and not progressing. Now they get you started in rehab, and the chances are pretty good. I think about 250 total that we've counted, and this is the DOD's numbers of actual spinal cord, not orthopedic spine injuries, but spinal cord, was only about 250 to 300.
What do you think of the way Congress and the President deal with veterans overall? Just your general feeling and the way the public treats it and how much money's being spent?
Today, the money's there. It's how we spend it. It's what gets prioritized. That's the question. I'm surprised that while the spirit of patriotism is there aren't a lot of people joining the military. There's a lot of talk about love for the military, but there's a recruiting problem. There's less than 1% has participated in today's, and this is after we got attacked. The biggest terrorist attack in our nation's history. And not a lot of people raise their hand to join and to fight. They talk about it. A lot of talk and a lot of bluster, a lot of that, but not a lot of putting real skin in the game and really standing up for the country at a great sacrifice. So I don't try to divine anybody's intent or love for the country, but I'm always surprised at how little most people are willing to sacrifice to live out that patriotism and sacrifice for something bigger than oneself.
You talked earlier about pain. Do you have it?
All the time.
Where?
It's because nerve pain throughout my body. It's a consequence of working, of being active. A lot of people take a lot of medications. I take very little, if any, because it has side effects, and I'd rather live life and endure a little pain than to be limited by a drug. So I'm not a typical case. The doctors are always surprised at how little medication I take, but it does come at the cost of living with the pain.
How often do you spend your day in that wheelchair?
I probably sleep 6 hours a day, and the rest of that time is in this chair.
Can you walk at all?
Not at all.
Is there anything that they're working on in research that someday may allow you to walk?
There's a lot of research going on, and a lot of it is promising. It's not quite at the stage where humans can be tested. Animal research is pretty controversial right now. But I've seen indications that and this research is such that you got to be patient, you got to wait on it, the breakthroughs just kind of happen when they happen. But we as an organization, we've invested a lot into understanding the spinal cord, why cell death happens, can they be regenerated after they die. I think that's probably where the biggest stride is going to happen once we understand how we can replace cells in the spinal cord and get limbs working again and replace functions that were killed off by a trauma to the spinal cord. I'm not a researcher, so I can't speak with authority on where it is now, but through our partnership with Yale and the New Haven VA, as a person who lives with this hope, I'm encouraged by what I see.
You mentioned animal research. Here's Congressman Dave Bratt on the floor of the House of Representatives talking about something that I want you to comment on.
My amendment will stop funding for painful dog experiments at the VA. Earlier this year, when my wife Laura and I read the news report about the VA's dog testing program at the Richmond VA Medical Center, we were disturbed by the descriptions of the types of experiments conducted on these puppies. From what I read, the type of work they were doing was on the level of torture.
What's that issue, and where does it stand now? That was earlier this year.
Right. This was a report out of the Richmond VA Medical Center. I believe they were canines who were being tested with cardiovascular research on canines is essentially what the report talked about. And in this case, Congressman Brad is the congressman from this state of Virginia, so he'd have Richmond in his territory, and so he took that report and fashioned legislation that would essentially ban all of a specific type of animal research that causes pain. Now that's very broad, and the issue for us wasn't whether there should be accountability in that case. I mean, if there was wrongdoing, if they deviated from putative scientific protocols, there should be some accountability. The undersecretary can pull funding, can stop research, can shut down a lab. None of that happened. The individual who was found to be in violation was removed, and that's where it should have stayed, or at least started in a discussion. No discussion happened. The House had a voice vote, unanimous. We're going to pass this banning animal research, and once we got word of it, we're thinking this has broader implications than you all understand. And so for us, it wasn't really about defending animal research. It was about understanding what the implications are when you stop certain types of research. What's hard to explain to the public is that there are reasons why research happens a certain way, and at least if you understand why you would use a canine as opposed to a computer or a mouse or a monkey, let's talk about it that way. Let's understand that there have been a lot of things that have come out of animal research. The pacemaker, the artificial pancreas, a lot of insulin, a lot of things that heal a lot of people have come from canine research. And so again, we're not going to defend any specific type of research, but we're going to have a conversation, or force a conversation, to consider the implications if you stop certain things, especially if it's from a perspective of emotion or a reaction to what was essentially an isolated incident.
Senator John McCain, a couple of years ago, talking about an issue that you've had a lot to say about. Let's watch.
It's been more than a month since allegations that some 40 veterans died while waiting for care at the Phoenix VA were first made public. To date, the Obama administration has failed to respond in an effective manner. Clearly, the VA is suffering from systemic problems in its culture that require strong, reform-minded leadership and accountability to address.
General Shinseki, that was sitting there in the head of the VA at the time, left after all this. I read that the Inspector General at the VA said there really were only 6 instead of 40 that died in this, and there was even questions about some of them. What's the status of all this?
That story grew a lot of tentacles. It wouldn't have mattered whether it was 1 or 100 to me. If somebody dies, there should be, somebody should be held accountable. But there was a lot of, I won't say misinformation, because there was clearly inefficiency. We reported in 2011 that they had a staffing problem. They were understaffed, and they were going to have issues with backlogs and waiting lists, and it wasn't addressed. So on some level, it needed the attention it gotten. And I think that the Undersecretary at the time wasn't a very good leader. He wasn't doing a lot of things the right way, and this was inevitable. At the same time, I think it went way too far, because it wasn't fixing the problem to talk about it in the way that a lot of people did, by demagoguing the issue to a point where nothing was good enough. Even when good things were happening, it didn't make the news because nobody wanted to hear about that. The reality is, it was a system that was underfunded and understaffed for way too long. They managed to a requirement instead of the actual need. Nobody actually measured the need and provided the wherewithal to meet that demand. And it wasn't unique to Phoenix. Phoenix is where the bottom fell out, but there were many facilities that could have been Phoenix across the country. And while a lot of them were run by good, well-meaning people, it was gonna fall apart at some point, and that's exactly what happened in 2014.
Any improvement?
Oh, lots of improvement. I think that veterans are, because the public is aware of a lot of this and looks for it, that's an incentive for specifically VA leaders to do a little better, to be more mindful, to listen more. I think that Secretary McDonald, who's a former secretary, started some great initiatives that are now carried forward by the current secretary, Dr. Shokin. Can it get better? Yeah, but now we're at least seeing leaders acknowledge the problem, at least acknowledge that there's a problem. Then we can have a conversation about how you fix it. That's the best transition that I've seen undertaken, and I think that's the best hope for finally fixing what's happening.
How much money do you have to raise a year to function?
For our organization, about $100 million a year to function.
$100 million?
Yes.
Where does most of that money go?
It goes to our programs. Our core mission is to provide benefits assistance, it's to provide medical advocacy, research and education, fight for the civil rights and dignity of our members, and to educate the public. And so the majority, the lion's share of what we raise goes to those functions.
How many people work for the Paralyzed Veterans of America?
Approximately 260.
Where is it based?
We're based here in Washington, D.C., but we have offices in 68 locations around the country and in Puerto Rico. Why were you picked to run this organization? A lot of it was luck, I would assume, being in the right place at the right time. The reality is there was a really near and dear mentor to me. His name was Homer Townsend. He was a former executive director of Paralyzed Veterans of America. We lost him last year, succumbed to the effects of spinal cord injury. He lived for 42 years with the injury. I met him during one of my assignments on one of the committees, and he saw something in me. He saw that. I don't know what it was, but he saw that. And so he asked me to consider coming out to Washington, D.C. from leave San Diego and come to D.C. I did that. I worked at the appeals office for a year and a half, and he handpicked me to run the Veterans Benefits Department, become a deputy, and then replace him. I'm going to credit his wisdom for why I was selected, but I'm trying to live up to every expectation he had for me. People that want to either give to this group that you run or want to get in touch with the group, how do they do it? Go to our website, pva.org is a good place to start, because it's important that anybody who wants to give, learn about what we do. Look at all the great things we've done. Look at the lives we've changed, and this is what you're investing in. And so we don't talk about ourselves enough in public, and we try to do that more. But if they go on pva.org or find us in social media at PVA1946, Facebook or Twitter, there's multiple ways to donate. We have a lot of corporate partners who've got some great programs. The Penske Truck Rental, we've got UPS, great companies that have been with us for a long time and love what we do. And they've got cause marketing opportunities, things like that. And just
very quick questions. We're out of time. What was your last rank when you left the Marine Corps?
I was a Chief Warrant Officer 2.
When did you meet your wife?
In 2011.
How old is your kid?
My youngest son is 4. I've got 4 daughters, so 4 teenage daughters and an older son.
We're out of time. Sorry, we have a lot more to talk about. Sherman Gillums Jr., he is the Executive Director of the Paralyzed Veterans of America. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
Free transcripts, or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at Q&A.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.